Session 3, Future of Alliance, will now begin. This session will be moderated by Ms. Paula Hancocks from CNN. Ms. Hancocks, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the plenary session number 3. This is Future of Alliance. So we have been hearing all this morning and this afternoon about the importance of alliances. We've been hearing about the necessity of alliances, certainly given the changing international order at the moment, also looking at increasing security challenges, and also looking at the ever-present threat from North Korea. So what I would like to do today is give each of our 7 panelists a chance to give their initial impressions on what they believe the future of alliance looks like, and then I'm hoping to open it up to the floor. We're running a bit tight on time, so we have just over an hour to talk about this, but I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. So we have 7 very knowledgeable panelists. It would take some time for me to discuss all their affiliations and their awards and their titles, so I do encourage you to look at their full biographies in the brochure. But just to briefly introduce them, first of all, Professor Karl de Gucht. He was the European Commissioner for Trade from 2010 to 2014, and he negotiated a number of the European free trade agreements worldwide. Now, prior to that, he also served as Belgium's Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. He is currently the president of the Brussels School of Governance at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, VUB. So, Professor, I'd welcome you to make your initial remarks, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It's what we are in fact living, it's a revival of alliances. Take NATO, I mean, NATO of course has always subsisted, but at a very low level. And we have seen that with the war in Ukraine, all of a sudden there was a revival, and NATO became a center point in this war effort. Although officially they are not part to it, it's obvious that they're playing a very big role. And also the European Union, that has struggled for decades to find its way in the security and defense issue, is now making headway. So it's because it is a necessity. And that is probably also true for all other alliances. Now, I would like to say that we should not limit alliances to a military thing. The more so that wars, etc., are changing very rapidly. And if ever there would be a war, for example, around Taiwan, it will be completely different from the war we are presently having in Ukraine, which is rather an old-fashioned war. I mean, as we had it in the 20th and end of the 19th century, if something were to happen here, it's obvious that this would be completely different. So we have to pay much more attention to new features in war, artificial intelligence, cyber war would become predominant. I have said once that I think that nuclear arms are arms of the past, because you would never use them again. I hope so. But you would certainly sooner or later be confronted with cyber crime and cyber war, which would be a completely new feature, and we haven't the slightest idea what it would be like. We have a lot of treaties about missiles, about nuclear warheads, etc. We have nothing on cyber war, and that is nevertheless what would happen in the future. So the alliances have to accommodate to that and also be aware of that. Secondly, I believe that it's very important that cooperation is not limited to military cooperation and to security, but also economy and industrially, and etc. We as the European Union, we have free trade agreements with Korea, with Japan, with Singapore, with Vietnam in this area. And if you look at the supply side arrangements, they will certainly change. And it's very important that we have now many more possible partners in the region to diversify what is presently the trade mainly with China, and that's going to change. That's also part of the alliance approach, which is, I think, very important for the future. Because a lot of what we are doing with China, we can also do it with others. And I'm saying that specifically because I do not believe in decoupling. I think decoupling would be a disaster for the whole world. But of course, we need to be very cautious. And maybe we already had better been cautious in the past, but which we were not. So we have to be cautious, but we should all continue trading, for example, with China, but making sure that for strategic sectors we have independence, we have autonomy. That's also the approach of the European Union. And the United States are going much further in that and going in the direction of decoupling. And I think that could be a very big mistake if we continue on that line. So that's also a topic that we should thoroughly discuss in the alliances, be it NATO or be it other alliances here in the region, and also in the direct relation between Korea and the United States.
Thank you, Professor. It's a good point that the alliance of the future obviously has to adapt to the conflict of the future, and AI and cyber is two departments there that we would need to take a closer look at. Next up, we have Ambassador Fujisaki Ichiro. Ambassador Fujisaki is a former Japanese ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2012. He's also served as ambassador to the United Nations and to the World Trade Organization in Geneva, a career diplomat for more than 40 years, so some extensive experience there. We're delighted to have you with us, Ambassador. If you could give your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, MJ-san, and thank you, Asan, for inviting me here, and like to congratulate Korea for 70 years anniversary of this alliance. Now it's fashionable in Asia to say, don't let us choose between US and China. If you go to ASEAN countries or wherever, you hear that. And I think, hey, I don't believe that. If you put two passports in front of them, two countries' passport, US and China, it's obvious which will they choose. And Korea and Japan are the two countries who don't say that. We are very clearly on democratic side and freedom side. So, especially I really respect and commend President Yoon's courageous decision. He has tried to improve relations with Japan in order to strengthen the alliance. Also, his remarks on Taiwan was very brave, and I hope his visit to United States will be a successful one. I'd like to congratulate Korea for hosting second and third Democratic Summit with the United States and others. But one thing I'd like to say about that is that please try to be as inclusive as possible, because if some countries think they are excluded, they will be sort of targeted by the other people to be sort of invited. And we should not try to gang up those countries which were not invited. So please try to be inclusive. That's only my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next, we have the Honourable Representative Ha Tae-kyung. He's a 3-term member of the National Assembly with a history of human rights advocacy as well. He served on the National Defence Committee and was a member of the Intelligence Committee. He currently serves as a member of the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee, and prior to his political career, he was involved in advocacy and was the president of Open Radio for North Korea. Representative Ha, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank you to invite me to this very important discussion. And also, I want to say that even though I belong now to the ruling party member, my presentation is not the party or not the government, only my personal view. I want to make, the time is very short, so I want to make three points. One thing is what South Korea has to do The other is what the United States should do, and the third is what the both have to do. The first one is I think South Korea should play more active and leading role in global politics and international community. The litmus test is how much we are going to do to help Ukraine. So very earlier, when the war started, Russia invaded Ukraine, I keep saying that South Korea should help Ukraine, even militarily, so military assistance. I keep saying that. So these days, very soon, the South Korean president said he is more open to the military assistance to Ukraine. I think it's very a wonderful progress in terms of our, national security, as well as the global position of South Korea. As you may know, I think, in my personal opinion, South Korea should belong to the G7 group. In terms of economy, we already belong to the very powerful economic countries. And in terms of culture, as you may know, in whatever continent, whatever religion, even in whatever race, Korean culture is very popular. Hallyu, everybody is crazy for it. So still we are, the very powerful countries in terms of economy and culture. Now is the time for us to be diplomatic power, maybe the same level as Britain, France, and Germany. So this is what U.S. also wants South Korea to do. So in this, for this visit, our South Korean president to the United States, Mr. Yoon, President Yoon, should say that South Korea play more active and leading role in international politics, particularly, against the Russian invasion to Ukraine. The second point is, what U.S. should do in terms of the threat from North Korea. As you may know, the capability of North Korean nuclear weapons is aggravating, stronger and stronger over time. Maybe in 5 years, I think they already have developed quite sophisticated the tactic nuclear weapons. They might deploy the nuclear weapons quite soon to the real battle. I think Kim Jong-un might use it against South Korea or against Japan. So that's why in Korea the public opinion, for ourselves, build our own nuclear weapons is growing stronger and stronger. But I think it's not very realistic. So so that's the reason why we keep saying, the U.S. Tactical nuclear weapons should be redeployed in South Korea. A month ago, I visited NATO in Brussels. I asked them the redeployment United States nuclear weapons in South Korean territory as whether it's violating NPT or not. They said no. If the tactical nuclear weapons could be controlled by U.S. United States. So the South Korean public opinion to redeploy U.S. tactical nuclear weapons will grow stronger and stronger. So whatever the U.S. might answer, this request could be stronger in South Korea. That's the second point. And the third is how to deal with North Korea. And my point is, until now, we only focused on the nuclear weapon issue. But later, we put more weight on human rights issues, North Korean human rights issues. Over the top, I think, is internet. You know, the right of access to internet is the most fundamental human rights in 21st century. But North Korea is the only world where ordinary people, cannot get access to. So I think it could be a new approach to the diplomatic normalization with North Korea. There was two doors. First door is nuclear doors. The second door is human rights door. And then finally, diplomatic normalization with United States. That's the process until now. But I think human rights doors, the weight more put on the human rights doors rather than nuclear doors. Denuclearization is final goal, but it's very long-term goal now. In the short term, I think the nuclear freeze, let them freeze, I think it's very appropriate a point for us to renegotiate the diplomatic normalization. But we make much of the internet issue. If North Korea opened the internet to their people, I think we should have more bold measures to diplomatically normalize with North Korea there. And that's the third issue. It's important because, in the society inside North Korea is changing. There is a new generation. This new generation call themselves differently from the old generation. Maybe, for example, the same in Korea, the old generation in Korea call his husband, the wife call his husband 여보. But have you ever heard about the Gangnam Style? But the young generation call their husband oppa. The same in North Korea. So the North Korean regime now this kind of young generation call them, it's an obstacle to their revolution. So to change North Korean society is very important, even in order to denuclearize North Korea. All the people in North Korea support the nuclearization in North Korea. It's very difficult to denuclearize it. So now it's time we focus on the public opinion inside North Korea. For that matter, internet is very important tool for the diplomatic goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Ha. Next, we have Alison Hooker, who is a Senior Vice President at American Global Strategies, overseeing their Indo-Pacific practice. Now, Ms. Hooker has more than 20 years of experience in the US government working on Asia. She served on the National Security Council as Deputy Assistant to the President and also Senior Director for Asia. So, Alison, thank you for joining us. Your remarks, please.
Thank you, Paula. And I'd like to say thank you to the Asan Institute for inviting me to join today. It's a real honor to be here speaking about the US-ROK Alliance. The Alliance is something special to me, not because of the work that I did on the Alliance, but because my dear uncle fought in the Korean War. And though he didn't talk about the war very much when we were growing up, we did learn from him to reverence the war, to reverence and those who fought and sacrificed for the war. And I'd like to do that again today, just to say thank you to those who fought and also those who've served the Alliance in the 70 years since. So it's really special to be here today and to speak to you about the future of the Alliance. As we've heard today, the Alliance has seen a lot of ups and downs, but I think I can say with as much confidence as I said in the years in government that it's the strongest it's ever been. But even with that, there's a lot of areas we can improve and deepen the relationship and advance the Alliance further. And on that, I'd like to just mention three things today, 3 topics today. Number one, of course, as it was the basis of our alliance, defending against the North Korean threat is still going to be key for for the future of the alliance, for all the reasons we've heard, and Representative Ha just mentioned some of those as well. But I would say to advance that relationship and to advance the work we do in the alliance, there's several areas to focus on. We're already seeing a great increase in our military preparedness and our exercises. We're doing more of that. I think that's good. Personally, I subscribe to the concept that strength deters and that weakness invites hostility. So demonstrations of strength are important for the work we do in our alliance, and those should continue. Obviously, extended deterrence, we've talked a lot about that today. I will just underscore the need to continue that. I hope we'll hear more about that coming from President Yoon's visit to Washington this week, and I expect we will. Third area we haven't really talked about, but where work can be done in the alliance is on implementation of our sanctions against North Korea. There's still a lot of room to work on that, not just in the traditional ways where we already have existing sanctions that remain in place. We know we won't get anything new out of the UN, but I think that together we can raise awareness that there are still efforts that can be made among like-minded partners and other allies around the world to hold North Korea accountable and hold those who help North Korea accountable as well through sanctions activities. Another way that we can advance our work in North Korea together is, as we talked about, trilateral cooperation, security cooperation, expanding that relationship, continuing to restore the relationship with Japan, US-Japan ROK, whether that's exercises, whether it's military cooperation, just expanding that capacity, expanding those capabilities is important now and will continue to be important, not just about North Korea, but perhaps for other threats in the region as well. And finally, just on the alliance, a quick point to say that the goal of our alliance with regard to North Korea should continue to be, I don't want to use the word denuclearization, but I just did, the elimination of the nuclear program, elimination of the nuclear threat coming from the North. And it's important to maintain that as our ultimate goal. Just quickly, two other points on the future of the alliance that I would like to make today. A couple of administrations ago, we used the phrase new frontiers of cooperation when talking about the US-ROK alliance. And in that era, that meant expanding from working to counter the North Korean threat to expanding to cybersecurity, global health, and climate change. Well, there are many more frontiers beyond that, and we are already doing some of that work, but it's important for the future of our relationship to continue that and to continue to expand, just briefly, emerging technologies, including AI, semiconductors, EV batteries, quantum technology, autonomous robots, all of these new-fangled, fancy technologies that make me feel older and older every day, but these really are the future. And they're not just the future of our cooperation, they're the future of the threat. So the more we can do to work together on that, including by overcoming some of the challenges that have risen over the past few years between Washington and Seoul, whether that's the IRA, or the CHIPS Act. There are ways around those challenges, and we should work together to overcome them, and I am confident that we will. And finally, just the third area where I see the future of our alliance going, it's really with regard to the global challenges, the tectonic plates that are moving, some of the issues that we've mentioned here, even in our session. President Yoon's concept of a global pivotal state has been mentioned a number of times today. I think it's really important. Korea really does have much to offer the world in the context of our alliance and also just in the context of all the global challenges that we have. And some of those roles would include helping to preserve the international rules-based order, ensuring a free and open and prosperous Indo-Pacific, including through the implementation of the new Indo-Pacific strategy that Korea has issued. I think the global pivotal state concept will further all of these goals. And you might wonder, how does that relate to the alliance? Well, quite simply, a strong bilateral alliance bolsters Korean and US ability to do more globally. And I think this is true for the US alliance relationships, other US alliance relationships as well. Just a couple of final points. Much has been said, and even including today, about President Yoon's comments last week regarding Ukraine and regarding Taiwan. And, among other issues, including minilateral engagements and a role Korea could play there, there really is a place for South Korea in each of these issues. Whether it's weapon sales to Poland, or helping to contribute to Taipei's ability to deter China, there's still a lot. Well, not still. There is a lot that Korea can do, and I hope that it will, and perhaps we'll have time to talk about that another time. But just to wrap up, if you look at an alliance as simply as two countries identifying threats, either for one or the other country, and partnering together to meet and overcome them. That's what we're doing with Korea. That's what the U.S. and the Republic of Korea are doing. And I hope to see more of that in the future. And sorry for taking so long. Thanks.
Not at all. Thank you, Alison. There's a number of interesting points you've brought up there that hopefully we'll have a chance to get to afterwards. Next up, we have Anthony Kim. Anthony's a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and the editor of the annual Index of Economic Freedom. And Mr. Kim's also manager of global engagement for the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation as well. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paula. Great to see you and great to be with you. So this year's important Asan Plenum 2023, the title is very important, as you can see. Alliance of 70 years and beyond. But to me, one word catch my eyes. That word is beyond. Because in a way, celebrating 7-decade-long alliance is probably easy part. Let's celebrate. But what we are really, and what should be interested in is what's ahead of us. How do we make our alliance better, greater from this point on? So I think this is time for us to celebrate, but really to elevate our alliance. And I think that's been what we are talking about today. I want to visualize Y-bar and X-bar in terms of visualizing 7-decade-long US-Korea alliance. Starting point will be 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty. When we had that, I think no one expected what kind of shape, slope, Washington and Seoul will draw. It could be very neat 45-degree slope, or it could be zigzagging a lot of up and down. I think we had a combination of that. It wasn't either very neat slope line, 45-degree, but it wasn't anything crazy lines. We made very nice long-term upward slope. If this is an investment curve, I think this is really high return, very impressive S&P 500, whatever, NASDAQ, very return-oriented, nice slope. That's what we've been charting over the past 7 decades. But I think that what's most important, once again, is over these years, I think we learned a lot from each other because of the crisis. We don't have to go back to last century, even this century, 21st century. We've been already going through 3 different crises. The first decade of this century, we had to deal with a security crisis, 9/11. South Korea was a very willing, like-minded partner for the United States. And second decade, we had to deal with a global financial crisis. South Korea, United States, we had a currency swap to build back better. And third crisis we just went through, that's a public health crisis. So all these crises, perhaps more to come, but these crises made our alliance very unique and capable. So My second point is that because of that, I tend to think that our alliance is really like an iPhone or iPad. This is really functional alliance. It's not just symbolic, kumbaya, yes, we are special, we are partners, we are friends. It's really action-oriented alliance. This is really alliance in action because we have a lot of apps in this US-Korea iPad or Samsung phone, whatever you call it. We have a multiple functionality, either security or economic, cultural, science, and whatever. So this is very unique alliance, obviously, because not that many countries, they have both defense treaty as well as free trade agreements. I think United States is one of the few who actually has, these, multi-dimensional, institutionalized tools when it comes down to alliance with the United States. So then, what's next? I think that's probably the question we should talk about because after all, the title of this session is Future of Alliance. The Austrian-American Business Management Group, Peter Drucker, he said the best way to predict future is to create it. And I think that's the spirit for the United States and South Korea. Perhaps this is time for us really not just to celebrate, as I said earlier, just elevate our alliance by pioneering new frontiers. As Allison mentioned a few of those examples, and I'm sure President Yoon will be talking about more examples with President Biden. But I think that this is a really time for us to look back and let's see what else can we do. I think we have a tools, I think we have a know-how, and my final point will be, it's not anymore South Korea is United States Indo-Pacific partner or partner in Northeast Asia. I think South Korea is a really linchpin for the United States, especially when it comes down to Atlantic theater, Pacific theaters combined, because inevitably we'll have to talk about how do we deal with these both theaters, Atlantic theaters and Pacific theaters. It'll eventually involve the reconstruction of Ukraine. It'll eventually involve how to counterbalance China to a greater degree. So I think our space in terms of US-Korea alliance, it has become expanded and elevated, and I think that it's time to really focus on our next steps together. Thank you.
Anthony Kim, thank you very much for those comments. Next, we have Colonel David Maxwell. He's a retired U.S. Army Special Forces colonel who served in the U.S. Army for 30 years, much of that time focused in Korea and on Korea. He's now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, specializing in Northeast Asian security affairs and irregular, unconventional, and political warfare. Colonel Maxwell, your first thoughts, please.
Thank you, Paula, and it's great to be here, and thank you to Asan for this opportunity. It's really great to be able to talk about alliances. I served in the NATO alliance during the Cold War, the Japan-U.S. alliance, the Philippine-U.S. alliance, but here in Korea I had 5 tours in the ROK-U.S. alliance, and so I'm really kind of partial to the Korean alliance here. I'm really happy to hear all of the future talk, but I want to talk about one part of the alliance for the future, and that's the strategy. The Mutual Defense Treaty was mentioned. I don't know who authored it, but if you read it, and Anthony is right, it's a functional document because it never mentions the DPRK or North Korea. It was a very prescient treaty that was written, and it continues to be functional today. So I commend the authors of the Mutual Defense Treaty because it calls for both countries to defend each other in the Asia-Pacific region from mutual threats. And that really provides the foundation for our security alliance. And I'm happy to see how South Korea has evolved, the global pivotal state. And I think South Korea is now almost a full partner in the arsenal of democracy, providing weapons to NATO countries and others around the world. But I think it's important when we talk about the strategy, and as a former military planner, we think about the worst case. And the worst case is that the Kim family regime still exists, and we have to be concerned with the threat from the north. We cannot neglect that. And for any strategy going forward, we must have an understanding of the nature, the objectives, and the strategy of the regime. And I'll sum those up. North Korea conducts political warfare to subvert South Korea and drive a wedge in the ROK-US alliance. It conducts blackmail diplomacy, the use of threats, increased tensions, and provocations to coerce political and economic concessions. And it is developing advanced warfighting capabilities to support political warfare and blackmail diplomacy, but ultimately for warfighting on the peninsula to use force to unify the peninsula under its rule. That's the essence of North Korea, the nature of the regime, its objectives, and its strategy. I think it's time for an alliance shift in strategy. Allison said don't use denuclearization, but we have always thought about denuclearization as the main objective for the last 30 years. And we thought about denuclearization and then unification. But I think it's time to shift that on its head. It's also the 70th anniversary of the Armistice Agreement. Paragraph 60 of the Armistice Agreement, written by military commanders, understood that the military can't solve the problem on the Korean Peninsula. It must be a political solution to what they said was the Korea question. And the Korea question is the unnatural division of the peninsula. And so I offer a three-part strategy that we should consider. And this new strategy should be built on the rock-solid foundation of the Combined Forces Command, the military capabilities to be able to deter war, deter the use of WMD, defend the Republic of Korea, and defeat the North Korean People's Army. That is the mission for the ROK-US Combined Forces Command. But the military also must be prepared to support the political outcome in the North, and that political outcome will be unification. So the military will have to support the unification process. That is why OPCON transition is so important, because I would submit that any operation conducted in North Korea, whether war, regime collapse, or any other contingency, must be led by a Korean general. And while that is distasteful to some, I think it's most important for the long-term legitimacy of a united Republic of Korea, and also to protect the United States from any perception that the United States is an occupying force in North Korea. So OPCON transition is important to the future. Now, this three-part strategy I propose rests on an understanding of onward toward unification. The first is a human rights up-front approach. I'm happy to hear Representative Ha talk about human rights. Human rights is not only a moral imperative, it is a national security issue, because Kim Jong-un must deny the human rights of the Korean people in the North in order to remain in power. And we need to take an equal approach to dealing with North Korea's security problems and human rights issues. There can be no normalization without changes to the human rights situation in the North. But whenever we talk about the nuclear issues or ballistic missile test, we must also talk about human rights. Because the Korean people in the North suffer not because of sanctions, not because of natural disasters, but the deliberate policy decisions of Kim Jong-un to prioritize nuclear weapons and missiles over the welfare of the Korean people. The second aspect of future strategy has to be reliance on an influence campaign to influence the regime elite, the Korean people, Korean citizens, and the second-tier leadership. And that information really has to focus on understanding the situation in North Korea, the outside world, practical information on how to organize for collective action, and we must attack North Korea's strategy. We must recognize their strategy, we must understand it, we must expose it, and then we must attack it with a superior political warfare and information strategy to undermine the legitimacy of the regime. Let me just say the bottom line is we're not going to see an end to the nuclear threat or the crimes against humanity unless we see unification, a free and unified Korea, a Korea that is secure, stable, economically vibrant, non-nuclear, and unified under a liberal constitutional form of government based on liberty, freedom, human rights, free market economy, and and the rule of law. Ultimately, a free and unified Korea is a united Republic of Korea. You are okay, or you might say, you rock. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Colonel Maxwell. Some very interesting points in there. Now we have one final guest who is joining us virtually from Boston. We have Park Young-sun, who is a former minister of SMEs and startups here in Korea from 2019 to 2021. She made history as the first woman to head up a specialized government entity for SMEs in this country. She's also served as a senior advisor at CSIS in Washington and currently holds the position of senior research fellow at the Ash Center of Harvard Kennedy School. I'm aware we're all seeing me, so
네,
I'm wondering if...
반갑습니다.
Oh, hello.
네. Nice to meet you.
Oh, Ms. Park, welcome. Thank you. Your comments, please.
네. 아산 플래넘 2023 축하드립니다. 그리고 이렇게 함께 할 수 있어서 굉장히 반갑습니다. 지금 여기 보스턴 시각은 새벽 2시 38분입니다. 이 한미동맹과 관련된 정말 매우 중요한 행사라고 생각이 되는데요. 1953년도에 군사동맹으로 시작한 한미동맹이 70주년을 맞았는데 이제 시기별로 보면 한미동맹 3기에 접어든다라고 생각이 됩니다. 한미동맹 1기는 냉전시대 약 50년간 군사동맹 위주로 진행이 되었고 한미동맹 2기는 소련의 멸망 이후에 미국 주도의 그 자유무역이 시작이 되면서 한미 FTA를 계기로 한 군사동맹에서 경제동맹으로의 발전입니다. 그러면 이제 제3기에 접어드는 이 한미동맹은 GCSA, 그러니까 글로벌 Comprehensive Strategic Alliance, 글로벌 포괄적 전략 동맹 이렇게 설명을 드릴 수가 있겠습니다. 그러니까 군사 동맹에서 경제 동맹 그리고 이제 여기서 더 나아가서 과학 기술 그리고 우주 시대를 함께 하는 좀 더 포괄적이고 그리고 예술 분야, 아트 문화 분야도 함께 포함이 돼야 되지 않을까 이렇게 생각을 합니다. 지금 1기, 2기, 3기를 비교해 봤을 때 지금 3기로 접어든 이 시점은 매우 중요하고 정말 아주 크리티컬한 그런 포인트라고 생각하고 있습니다. 미국의 바이든 대통령이 국가안보 전략 보고서에서 이런 이야기를 했습니다. 향후 10년간 중국과의 지정학적 경쟁이 구체화되는 결정적 10년이 될 것이다. 결국 이 말은 뒤집어 놓고 보면 한미동맹도 앞으로의 10년이 지난 70년의 어떤 그런 변화보다도 더 매우 격동적인 그러한 시기가 될 것이다 라고 생각이 됩니다. 그러면 이 시점에서 지금 이 3기로 넘어가는 포괄적 동맹과 1기 냉전 시대의 동맹의 그 형태는 매우 유사해 보입니다. 그러니까 북한, 중국, 러시아의 동맹, 그리고 한미일 3국의 동맹의 중요성이 점점 강조되고 강화돼야 되는 그런 시점이죠. 그러나 그 내면을 들여다봤을 때는 냉전 시대의 한미 동맹과 지금 제3기로 접어드는 포괄적 동맹, GCSA 이 동맹에서의 그 내면적인 면에서는 여러 가지로 점검해야 될 다른 세 가지 포인트가 있습니다. 먼저 지오폴리틱스, 지리학적 변화입니다. 그러니까 과거 냉전 시대에는 미국과 소련의 냉전이었습니다. 그리고 이 당시에는 경제가 블록화되어 있었습니다. 동유럽과 서유럽 이렇게 완전히 나뉘어져 있었죠. 그러나 지금 제3기로 넘어가는 지금의 이 신냉전 시대라는 단어에 대해서는 여러 가지 논란도 있긴 합니다만은 지금은 미국과 중국의 그 충돌입니다. 이 미국과 중국의 충돌 속에서 한국과 미국의 동맹의 이 관계를 어떻게 발전시켜 나가야 하는 것인가 이 부분을 아주 세밀하게 들여다봐야 되는데 문제는 중국이 WTO 가입 이후에 과거의 미국과 소련과는 달리 세계 경제와 통합되어 있다는 것이죠. 지금 중국과 무역하는 나라의 수는 한국을 포함해서 약 120개국입니다. 그러니까 미국의 동맹국들이 이 중국과의 경제적, 외교적 이해관계에 매우 민감해질 수밖에 없고 과연 이분법적인 논리가 여기에 과연 적용이 되겠느냐 하는 그런 문제입니다. 얼마 전에 하버드 케네디 스쿨에 대만의 고위 관료가 방문을 했었습니다. 그런데 그 고위 관료가 저에게 이런 질문을 했었습니다. 한국과 중국의 교역량이 어느 정도의 비중을 차지하느냐? 대만과 중국의 교역량의 비중은 약 47%를 차지하고 있기 때문에 대만의 입장도 겉으로는 상당히 강경할 수밖에 없지만 이러한 어떤 경제적인 이유로 인해서 강원 양면 작전을 쓸 수밖에 없는 그런 고민이 있다. 이제 이런 이야기를 했는데 여기에서 던지는 그 시사하는 바가 굉장히 많은 이야기다라고 생각됩니다. 그리고 두 번째 포인트는 이 신기술, 기술의 발달과 관련된 문제입니다. 과거 냉전 시대의 중국은 미국의 도전장을 내밀 정도로 그렇게 기술과 관련된 부분에 있어서 경쟁력을 갖고 있지 않았습니다. 그러나 지금 상황은 미국이 중국에 관해서 기술을 선점하려고 그렇게 지금 정책을 펴갈 수밖에 없는 그런 상황이 됐고 그렇기 때문에 미국이 보조금을 사용해서 이 제조 기반을 재건하겠다는 정책을 취하면서 수출 통제 정책을 가져가고 있습니다. 예를 들면 반도체나 전기 자동차 분야와 관련해서는 한미 FTA라는 것이 가동이 되고 있지만 사실상 한미 FTA가 무력화된 거나 마찬가지인 이런 상황이 됐습니다. 따라서 이번에 윤석열 대통령의 미국 국빈 방문에서는 이 양자 컴퓨팅이라든가 바이오라든가 인공지능이 앞으로도 계속해서 중국에게는 수출 규제 대상이 될 것이기 때문에 이 부분을 한미 정상회담에서 한국이 얼마만큼 대체할 수 있는 대안으로서의 어떤 역할을 하느냐 이것을 확보하는 것이 가장 큰 관건이 아닐까 이렇게 생각이 되고 오늘 넷플릭스가 한국에 대규모 투자를 하겠다라는 소식이 전해졌습니다마는 앞으로 한미 동맹은 아트와 컬처의 얼라이언스 그러니까 하드웨어에서 소프트 파워 중심으로 또 자리를 옮겨가야 되는 무게 중심으로 옮겨가야 되는 것 아닌가 그렇게 생각이 됩니다. 그리고 세 번째로는 북한의 핵무기 개발과 관련된 시각입니다. 과거에 소련의 멸망 이후에 지난 30년 동안은 중국과 러시아의 입장이 북한의 비핵화에 큰 도움은 되지 않았지만 그래도 비핵화를 해야 한다는 파트너였었습니다. 그러나 이제는 우크라이나 전쟁 이후에 중국과 러시아는 확실한 입장 변화가 생겼습니다. 유엔에서 북한을 정치적으로 엄호하고 있습니다. 그리고 이 우크라이나 전쟁을 매개체로 해서 무기와 탄약을 북한이 러시아에 수출을 하고 대신 식량 협상을 하는 이제 이러한 상황으로 가고 있기 때문에 이러한 세 가지 포인트를 앞으로 한미 동맹에서 어떻게 풀어내고 그리고 이것을 어떻게 우리가 잘 서로 협상하면서 극복해 갈 수 있느냐 이것이 3기를 맞는 한미 동맹의 가장 중요한 과제가 되지 않을까 이렇게 생각하고 있습니다. 이곳 하버드 케네디 스쿨에서도 지난주에 한미 시큐리티 서밋 그러니까 안보 회의가 열렸었는데요. 이 안보 회의에서 오는 28일 날 윤석열 대통령의 하버드 케네디 스쿨 연설에서 모더레이터를 하는 조세프 나이 그 하버드 케네디 스쿨 전 학장께서 이런 이야기를 하셨습니다. 지금 상당히 그 확장 억제 정책과 인내가 필요한 시기이다. 그리고 2만 8천여 명의 미군 주둔이 확장 억제의 핵심이 될 것이다. 그런 상황에서 지금 이런 미중 간의 갈등이 지속되고 있는 상황에서는 여러 가지 많은 어려움이 있지만 외교의 문을 활짝 열고 설득해야 된다라는 그러한 이야기를 하셨습니다. 결국 한미동맹의 궁극적인 목표는 한반도 평화가 아니겠느냐, 이러한 이야기로 요약될 수 있겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Ms. Park. And I think extended deterrence is probably something we'll be hearing a fair bit about over the coming days with President Yoon in DC. Now, I'd just like to start off with one question. I really want to open it up to the audience. We've got about 20 minutes left, so please let me know if you have any questions. I wanted to use President Yoon and the US ROC alliance as the example in a question of how do you balance strengthening one alliance with jeopardizing other relationships. And what I mean by this is obviously recently President Yoon has spoken about Taiwan and he has angered China. He has also spoken about Ukraine and has angered Russia. And he's also moving closer to Japan, which in many cases is angering his own people. So he is trying to strengthen the US ROC alliance, but there is always the danger that it will alienate others. So for a future alliance, how do you think that should be balanced? Ambassador, yes, please.
Thank you very much. Maybe not answering directly because I spent only 2 minutes in my initial account. I want to say a little bit more. One about extended deterrence that we have been discussing. I, for one, think that maybe situation today is coupling more than decoupling because remember in 1980, early 80s when Soviet Union put IRBM SS-20 to Western Europe, people thought, hey, that would not reach America, so we are going to be decoupled in West. Now, it's going to be coupled with the United States. So in a way, the extended deterrence may be more effective. This is a little, maybe a different view from a lot of people are discussing. Point two, when we are discussing future of alliance, I think everyone has China in mind as competitor, and I think we have that as well. But compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, no one thinks China is a formidable, awesome country which can take over the United States quickly. They have four, if I may say, weak elements, 4 Ds: demography, aging society; discrepancy, haves and have-nots; debt, country's national debt is big, but also they are giving a lot of debt to developing countries. Biggest creditor, $500 billion. So, and lastly is democracy, because they have alienated from West by warrior diplomacy and also Global South Summit. India did not invite China, so it's really agonizing now. But I think still a very important partner we have to engage in, but we should not think it as a formidable country which all cannot challenge at all. Lastly, as for future of alliance, institution is important, Quad, AUKUS, CPTPP, and I think with Korea, we should be looking more at military joint exercise or something like ACTS, those things, and we can institutionalize GSOMIR, they're coming back, so I think a lot of things we can do together, and I think that's the way for us. I'm sorry to have taken time, but I think altogether it would not make 5 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. Colonel Maxwell, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think that President Yoon is exercising bold leadership. I mean, I think he's being a statesman. And while it appears that he's acting to improve the ROC-US alliance, which I think he is, but I think his actions are also in keeping with his strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategy, which I think is heavily based on defending the rules-based international order. So comments on Taiwan, actions in Ukraine, all of those are about defending the rules-based international order. So I think he's being consistent with his strategy. And yes, it's aligned much with us. And of course, in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, the seventh line of effort is improved trilateral cooperation, ROC, Japan, and the U.S. And so certainly we're pleased with that. But upsetting China and Russia, well, yes, they may be upset, but I think that the message is South Korea supports the rules-based international order. And threats to Taiwan, Putin's war in Ukraine are certainly violations of the international rules-based order.
Agree. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, Karen.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate the Japanese speaker for pointing out that China is not always 10 feet tall. The debt and demographic problems are serious. I wanted to ask the Korean representatives a question. The discussion today about getting that 70% of Koreans support having your own nuclear capability. If Koreans were polled on the question, do you prefer your own nuclear capability or 25,000 plus American soldiers, what would their answer be?
That's me?
I think it's not to me. I think
Is that to
Koreans.
Representative Ha?
Is it?
Or-
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very good question. I also asked the same question when I visited NATO. All the people in NATO said that our own nuclear weapons by Korean themselves could lead to, the U.S. troops, leave South Korea and international economic sanctions from outside world. So that option, in terms of policy of the country, is not realistic. That's what I have said. And instead, the redeployment, the tactical nuclear weapons, American tactical nuclear weapons, we have had it maybe several decades ago. The same thing might be redeployed in South Korea. That is not violating NPT and any international agreement if it is controlled by United States. So that could, so the thing is political. South Korean people are very afraid that North Korea might attack us, even in terms of nuclear weapon. So how to make South Korean people feel secure and stable? That's not very possible by only means, just worrying, nuclear extended deterrence, anything like that. So the nuclear weapons themselves might feel Korean people feel we are allies, let's go together, or let's live together. Otherwise, they cannot trust it.
But if the U.S. controlled the tactical nuclear weapons, why would that satisfy South Korean people any more than the fact the U.S. can launch nuclear weapons from a submarine?
But the problem is sometimes U.S. president might make South United States relation in danger, like President Trump. Sometimes he might say, they're gonna let U.S. troops out of Korea, or the defense budget 5 times higher, unimaginable, irrational. So U.S. is also democracy. Nobody knows whatever happen in the future in the United States. So we need more stronger guarantees.
Thank you. Good questions. Anybody else like to ask a question? Yes, please.
My name is Jung-Gyu Lee. I'm a career diplomat, now retired. I just want to ask 2 questions, if I'm allowed. First question goes to Colonel Maxwell. You mentioned about OPCON transfer and CFC. In that case, when the OPCON transfer is completed, can US generals take orders from South Korean generals? And it comes to my mind that it is not very easy for the US generals to take orders from the South Korean generals. What's your take on this issue? The second question goes to Alison Hooker and Anthony Kim. You both mentioned about future and beyond of the 70 years of alliance. What do you think is the highest on the list of priorities we have in the future and beyond the 70 years? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question, and my answer is we have no problem taking orders from Korean generals. General Baek Geun-gi was my commander, the mayor of Yongin now. He was my commander in the Special Warfare Command, and we had no problems taking orders from him. I think you might be referring to the myth of the Pershing Rule and U.S. military will not be placed under foreign command, but we need to remember that CFC is a bilateral command and answers to the military committee, which is made up of the representatives of the national command and military authorities of both nations. And throughout the current CFC, throughout the entire integrated staff, there are Korean generals that give orders to American generals or American soldiers and vice versa. So I don't anticipate that there will be a problem. And I also say that because of our 70-year relationship. And the CFC, I can say without question, is the best bilateral command really in the history of the world. And so this long relationship, I think, will serve us well in the future. And let me ask one last question, or one last point is that in any coalition, the members of the coalition, they will answer to their nation first. Korea answers to Korea first, the U.S. answers to the U.S. first, and no soldier will act in contravention of his nation's interest. That's why in United Nations operations, any coalition operations, there are often national caveats. But in CFC, if there is a Korean general in charge, American generals will take orders from him.
Just briefly to answer your question on the future of the alliance, I mean, I think in tandem, ensuring a strong defense while continuing in the future technologies that I mentioned, I think both things at the same time should be prioritized.
My point would be a bit different. I think United States and South Korea can team up, and we can build things together, not necessarily in South Korea or in the United States. What I mean by teaming up is we have know-how, we have technology, we have like-minded willingness. So we can go to Europe, especially Central and Eastern European countries, and we can do a lot of infrastructure development together. It could be defense infrastructure, connectivity, energy, even as simple as upgrading airports. So I think United States and South Korea, obviously we can do space and all that, but my thinking is that we can do a lot more infrastructure building around the globe. I mean, the priority should be made, but in my view, Central and Eastern European countries, perhaps eventually we can get to the African nations to build a better infrastructure that involves, again, institutions as well. So United States and South Korea, obviously, as we've been talking about, ideas and institutions, they're all key foundations of infrastructure building. And United States and South Korea, we have similar technology and most advanced know-hows, and I think that's where we can make some practical cooperation as we get into the next 7 decades of alliance.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. We just have a couple of minutes left. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Hideshi Tokuchi from Japan. Some of the panelists mentioned Taiwan, so I'd like to ask a question about the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity to any one of the American panelists. In my view, the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity will make the cooperation between U.S. and some other allies, like Japan, Australia, and even South Korea, to cooperate on the defense of Taiwan. So, I'm just wondering how sustainable the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity will be.
Who would like to take that one?
If I may, I just answer in the following way. I think your question is very important, but I think I want to highlight next year, 2024, happens to be 45th anniversary of what we call TRA, Taiwan Relations Act. That is a very important, basically, the document and basis for the U.S. relationship with Taiwan. Now, 45 years ago, that's again, 20th century version. So perhaps this is time for us collectively, again, South Korea, Japan, and all others included in Indo-Pacific, how we can upgrade or how can we modernize this TRA. I mean, we cannot just go on with the same TRA which was written 45 years ago. So perhaps those questions you raised, I think this is a time for us to reflect new reality. The big question, if I may, we have to ask ourselves is really, what time is it? What time is it? What kind of China are we dealing with? The fundamental question is, what time is it? Is it same 1970 or even 2000? This is a very different era. So I just want to emphasize that perhaps when we try to upgrade and then modernize this Taiwan Relations Act, that could be a very important conversation we should have.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to join in with that? Or?
Hard to follow that one. That's a great answer.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much to all 7 panelists. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you.
Thank you.